you for joining our first virtual gathering of 2022. We look forward to debating the subject of Society Acts today, expanding our discussion on climate action. This is our 10th year of TEDx Glasgow, and we have engaged over 18 million people on ideas. Therefore, it brings me great pleasure to invite renowned global experts to join our panel today with our incredible host, Susie Bruce. During the next 90 minutes, we will aim to give you more clarity on the effective actions we can all take in order to save our planet. Over the coming months, we will be sharing more ideas worth doing as part of our Make or Break year, all in support of climate action, SDG 14. Keep a lookout for these. We would like to take this opportunity to thank you for joining us.
And thank our partners who have been great supporters and advocates of the work that we do. They are leaders when it comes to evolving towards a lower carbon economy and a just transition. They are brave to share their knowledge, collaborate on climate change and not compete. And this is a clear message we want to share with society at large. Collaboration on solutions. At today's debate, we will be clear on what action you can take now. These actions may surprise you in that it will not involve behavior change. They will help to significantly reduce your carbon footprint. It's time for Make or Break. Over to you, Susie.
Now, my name is Susie Cormack Bruce, and my role tonight is a simple one. It's to keep the conversation flowing, our guests on point, and allow everyone to be heard, and that includes you at home. This is Society Acts, after all, and we want you to be part of this conversation. Now, to put your question to the panel, all you need to do is contact the TEDx Glasgow team via the instructions given to you as you signed in tonight. You can also contribute via social media, TEDx_Glasgow on Instagram and at TEDx Glasgow on Twitter. Now, we are all stakeholders in this planet, and we all have a voice. So please use yours tonight and join in the discussion. Now, time to meet our panel, and our first member is Dr. Sweta Chakraborty, a risk and behavioural scientist whose work is motivated by the need for clear, credible, evidence-based communication to urgently and proactively manage the risks that threaten human security and well-being, be that from issues such as climate change to COVID-19. She is a TEDx South by Southwest veteran and a globally recognised keynote speaker for companies such as Goldman Sachs and Mercer. Sweta is the US president for We Don't Have Time, the world's largest social network and review platform on climate. Thank you, Sweta, for joining us this evening. We're also delighted to be joined by Gail Gallie. Gail started her career in advertising before taking a role in marketing at the BBC, where she led the marketing for Radio 1. Gail also worked on the relaunch of non-profit brands such as Children in Need and Sport Relief. In 2010, she was appointed CEO of the ad agency Fallon, and then after co-founding Project Everyone, a not-for-profit communications agency which uses the power of creative campaigning to bring the sustainable development goals to life, Gail became CEO of the Jamie Oliver Food Foundation. In 2019, alongside her third sector work, she launched Project 17, a consultancy helping the private sector steer their purpose around the aforementioned global goals. Many thanks for joining us tonight, Gail. And rounding off tonight's trio is Bhavini Patel, who, since discovering her family's history of climate dislocation, has become a dedicated activist, strongly aware of the interconnection of social and environmental issues. She advocates for racial, social and climate action justice through her support for Extinction Rebellion, Black Lives Matter community circles, and Kill the Bills campaign against the police, crime, sentencing and courts bill. Her achievements include co-founding an affinity group in Extinction Rebellion, XR Unify, in a bid to build diversity within the movement. Bhavini, welcome. Now, with our panel complete, let's go on with tonight's first question. And this one is to all panel members. How do we create a just and fair transition to a circular or well-being economy that's truly just and fair to all, but can equally deliver on action for climate change? Bhavini, I'll come to you first on that.
So really, there's two effective mechanisms here. But the first, really, we need to address and tell the truth of what we're facing. And we have some amazing tools. So one of those is a citizens' assembly. And this is a truly participatory way of bringing democracy to the people. And it allows people to find those answers, to co-create them, and to be empowered to implement them. So you've got people in charge of their own futures, and when they are educated, they actually know how to effectively make those changes. And the other one is to stop subsidizing fossil fuels. In this particular country, this is still very much the case. And when we do something like that, we can offset it and give it back to the people and to the green technologies that could be built from those. So there is mechanics in community and people, as well as in financial mechanisms that are available today that people can actually take part in. So it's a collective as well as a financial change and a system change, because it just cannot be one thing or the other.
Can I pick you up just basically on the People's Assembly? Can you tell me how that would work? Because my reading of it, or what I have been told about it, is this is unelected. You know, it's not actually democratic. So could you explain a little bit more about it?
Yes, of course. So really, it's like the jury service in this country. They are selected based on socioeconomic and geographic and everything, you know, a cross section of society that allows for something like 1,000 people if you're talking about citizens assembly, or if you're talking about a people's assembly, which can be used for communities. But if you're looking at governmental and large scale, it's citizens assembly. And there is a citizens assembly that took place for COP, right? So it means that those 1,000 people that get selected are given and educated by experts, right? So that they go through an actual education process first, just like a jury would. They'd be given evidence, they would be given counter evidence, and then they are able to come to a conclusion for themselves what they see as necessary and needed at this time. And when we deploy this type of mechanism, especially in this country, a jury, for example, has acquitted a number of climate activists, recognizing that the proportionality of what they did meets the requirement for what is necessary. And so we know that when power is given to people, they are more rational, more compassionate, and actually meet the needs of society compared to governments that are top down in power.
Sweta, can I come to you next with your response to that question?
Absolutely. And to echo what my panelist here has said, in addition to people, we need to make sure that the policies in place really are able to support the people. And I can offer that policy perspective with the case study that is currently what's happening in the United States, where I am based out of. I'm actually in Washington, D.C. presently. And your viewers will know that we have a massive bill that is currently making its way through Congress that is at risk of potentially being broken up. And this bill would be devastating for the United States and global climate change policy if this bill is broken up. But the goal is to still see the climate components of it pushed through Congress and made into law. And the reason for that is because part of this bill is this, what current President Joe Biden has stated as the Justice 40 framework, which is 40% of federal investment into climate resiliency in the United States will be given back to communities that have been historically discriminated against in the United States. Black and brown communities over the course of history that have been cited in more vulnerable parts of the country and have had unequal health impacts because of it, among with many other impacts like job insecurity, food insecurity, what have you. And so the Justice 40 framework is really integral to the Biden presidency. And this massive bill, this massive agenda, as it gets pushed through, will be able to course correct for that history of environmental racism and discrimination that plagues the United States. So we need to see policy like this put in place in countries like the United States that are historically is the biggest polluter in the world. And it can serve as a template for different policies that we can then see in other historically big polluters. Obviously, it's different regimes. China is a totalitarian regime, sure. But if we, as the United States, can course correct, stop being hypocritical domestically, now we are setting up a template and really creating an example of what can be done. And this needs to be done to ensure that we have an equitable future going forward. All of this effort being put into climate policy needs to bring everyone along with it. And without having measures like this Justice 40 provision that, again, dedicates 40% of all benefit be directed towards those who have been historically disenfranchised and most vulnerable, without policies like that, we're not going to see that equitable future. So that's the example I wanted to showcase regarding how we can achieve global equity in the climate, the transition to clean energy.
Gail, what would you say to that?
Well, I would say it's a massive question, and I'm feeling extremely honoured to be on the panel with my panelists, and a little intellectually under threat. So I'm going to bring it back down to Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and enormously agree with Bhavini on the Citizens Assembly piece, because I read once that of all the answers given, they ask the experts, the options you've got, ask, phone a friend who's your expert, or ask the crowd, that, the dramatic success of asking the audience versus asking the expert. And I'm a passionate believer in citizens' assemblies, and I'm truly optimistic if we get those going around the world as a sort of wave, that is how we're going to get to a much juster society. And I feel like we ought to keep up and step up the pace dramatically on governments and businesses, because, to quote Sweta's organization, we don't have time. I want everyone in the world to have taken part in a citizen assembly, but we don't have time unless we also get governments and businesses. And I suppose my concrete into this would be, get the taxation system fixed. It is mind-blowing, the levels of inequality that are continuing, not just continuing actually, but getting dramatically worse. And we've all read about how the rich got tremendously richer even during the pandemic, whilst billions are struggling to survive. So that's my kind of fix. But basically, I think it's both and. Bring people along and into this process, they'll get to a better answer, and step up the pressure and fix the tax system to flood some cash into the much needed solutions.
Because the interconnection is such a key thing, that, when we talk about climate change, we do have to talk about poverty. We do have to talk about education. It all has to basically be rolled into one. And that is something that I know that you're very passionate about, Bhavini, and doing that. You work so much with so many of the community circles. Can you explain a little bit more about your work there?
So the community circles was really based on a people's assembly. And the idea through what we experienced through the BLM uprising 2 years ago was that there was a whole load of feelings and a need for connection or unpacking this, rather than everybody feeling guilty and not coming to action. So we held these people's assemblies, community circles in parks on a weekly basis, where we unpacked what does it mean to be an activist that supports racial justice. Because it's one thing saying you're not racist, but to be an active anti-racist is something completely different. And this to bring people, give them a safe space to unpack themselves. Multiple people cried, and these are white allies that hadn't realized, they thought they were allies, but they weren't. They didn't realize what an ally actually means, and that means to take action. because inaction is being complicit, and that the same thing applies to the environmental movement here, right? So we've seen with Extinction Rebellion here in the UK, the level of, it's the #1 awareness improvement over the course of 2 years, but it hasn't resulted in action, right? And when we mean action, it can mean many forms, but awareness is no good without action. And this is what community embedment and community dialogue and these tools like the People's Assembly enables people to go on a journey where they come to action.
How comfortable do you feel in your role as an activist? Did you get to that point quite quickly? What triggered your need to actually act?
You know, I have family in India, and we'd be getting news about the crops failing, and it didn't really, I just, you know, it's been going on for so long that it didn't really register. And then it's only when I connected the dots of the climate changes that are happening and the impact on my family back home, and not just the impact on my family back home, but the impact on the entire global South. So climate emergency isn't in a 5 or 10 years time, it's happening right now, and disproportionately in the global South and disproportionately in the global North to brown and black people. So wherever you look across the globe, it's brown and black people that are having the impacts of pollution in any sphere of the planet. And when I came to awareness that the future of my family back India was at risk, it then built on my awareness that actually we are currently, I'm in London, that we had the highest pollution level, air toxicity level 2 weeks ago, that they issued a warning not to go out and exercise. Right? So this isn't something that's separate. We are interconnected. Everything actually, and the health outcomes from COVID in the Western world, in particular here in the UK, brown and black people were disproportionately affected by it in terms of death rates, because their health, their base level health was already impacted because of the areas they live in through environment and social inequality. So it hits in every way.
Again, on that subject as well, but we do need to say that the uptake on the vaccine, I know that this is not a vaccine subject, has actually been lower within, you know, the Black and minority ethnic, you know, community. So, you know,
well, because history tells them that the global North pharmaceuticals have treated them as guinea pigs, have eroded their health and used them as guinea pigs. How that the trust, and this is one of the key things I work in.
Trust is basically key here, yeah?
Key. I build trust in communities, in organizations, because if without trust, we can't move forward, right? And that's what happened with COVID and the vaccination. They disseminated the trust in this country and globally. The skepticism of brown and black people globally about this vaccine is because they were mistreated and misused by pharmaceutical companies across the globe.
Sweta, now can I come to you on that? Have you found that in your research that, you know, a personal connection or impact is a key trigger for change, or are there other more persuasive means to drive it?
I can provide a little science to back up Bhavini's point. I actually did my PhD research in the UK, so I have a deep appreciation for the UK, and your accent's making me quite nostalgic. So I studied the role of trust in behavioral change, and found, which has been replicated many times since my research, and I won't mention what year that was, but it'll give too much away, but it was a significant amount of time ago. But trust can account to up to 50% of the variance in decision making and ultimately predict behavioral outcomes. That shows how significant of a role it can play. Of course, there's other factors that influence how somebody is going to interpret information, and then based on that information, how somebody is going to then act, whether it's to wear a mask, whether it's related to public health, whether it's related to a doctor telling a patient you need to take this prescription drug to improve your patient outcome, whether it is to get those individuals to make the maybe more costly decision up front to switch an energy source, but ultimately something that is better for their individual outcome and their family outcome down the line. Trust, it plays the biggest role, but cost, of course, play a role. Tolerability of the particular issue or the risk plays a role, and affiliation with groups and how they're deciding also play a role. What is your identity, and how much does actually making a decision outside of the group identity that you affiliate with potentially impact your social standing and your potentially very survival in that community? And so there's many factors that influence how we are going to interpret information and act on that information. But again, trust is really key. And so Bhavini has hit the nail on the head. That's, if we have to focus and prioritize, that's where we should pay most attention to. Identifying those that are most trusted, that can actually get behind the science and the data. As a scientist, I stand on, my platform is one of, we have so many different types of people on this planet, so many demographics, religions, cultures, geographies. The only thing that we can really bank on that is going to be universally beneficial is science. If we follow the data, if we follow the facts, that's something that will universally be beneficial. And so we have to find the most trusted spokespeople to be able to get the messaging across to different groups and demographics around the world, and align those spokespeople to the science, and then have those spokespeople really reach their networks, whether that's a church leader, whether that's the soccer coach, whether that's the celebrity that a particular young group of people are really following and trusting. Those are the influencer networks that we can work to collectively activate and align to the science and really get the message across. That's how we're going to see some real widespread behavioral change.
Gail, I'm going to bring you in on this one, because you, of course, did with Project Everyone, set yourself the task of engaging 7 billion people in 7 days, which kind of reflects a little bit of what, Sweta said there. So can you explain a little bit more about that?
I can, and I can also come in and respond maybe a bit controversially to what she said there. I mean, obviously I'm playing devil's advocate, because I'm an advocate of science, but I'm not sure that is the way to genuinely get people to reassess what are pretty deep-seated habits and, frankly, addictions. As a society, if to be crude and color-based, the white people who've caused these problems are quite addicted to a system that puts them in charge, right, and gives us better lives than them at the moment. So I don't believe that more science and a sort of moral platform is going to get us off that addiction. What I've seen, and I will talk about 7 billion in 7 days after I've made this point, but what I've seen is, and it's probably my marketing and private sector background that plays into this as well, we need to show people that a clean world, a fair world, a just world is a better world for you as well. I'm sad to say it, but I don't think science-based, moral-backed campaigns make people change a system that they currently see as great for them deep down. Even if they say out loud, I totally get this and I really want a just transition, and yeah, we must do all of these things, but I'm not actually going to change, because right now I'm living my best life. And I think we need to make a case to say your best life, everyone's, your best life is pegged to everyone's best life, and every animal's, by the way, and every tree, and so there's a huge shift of consciousness that needs to be brought about. But I don't think that will only be achieved by getting better science into better spokespeople's hands. I think we need to always make the case of why it's better for everyone. So I don't know if that is controversial or not, but I've seen it time and time again that activists burn out, or charity workers burn out, because they don't understand why people aren't, whatever they're trying to do, give them money or change the policy, because it's so the right thing to do for the world. But I think until we get everyone to understand that it's the right thing to do for them, no one's going to change Jack, and then we're going to...
May I respond to that quickly?
Please.
So I would say I don't disagree with that. We need to communicate the science. We can agree on what the data is, but we need to better communicate it in a way that it resonates with the end recipient, whoever that is. So let's say the audience is those that are perfectly happy with status quo. We need to understand that. And that's what we haven't done enough of, is what are the existing mental models, and that's as jargony as I'm going to get with this. But what are the existing perceptions? What are the existing beliefs that exist in the individuals we're trying to communicate to? And then where does that actually compare to what we know the reality is, where the data is, and how do we close that gap? That's the point I'm trying to make, is that no, definitely just communicating the science does not work. That's where even through trusted spokespeople, that does not work. What we need to do is recognize what the existing perceptions are and identify messaging that is strategically targeting closing the gap between the reality of the data and the perceptions and the various perceptions that exist across so many different demographics across the world. And then who are the right people to communicate those messages once they have been strategically developed. That was the point.
I got it. And it links, that tees me up quite nicely to discuss briefly 7 billion in 7 days for the goals. The reason I think that we didn't do it. We didn't reach 7 billion, but I think we reached 3.6 billion in 7 days, but it still wasn't bad. But we were fueling optimism. And I think that's why we managed to get people's attention, governments, media, people to give us media, business to give us money and advertising space, because the SDGs, the global goals, represented a plan, like an optimistic plan for the future that people saw, and we made sure it was colorful and exciting and multilingual and multicolored, but people saw hope. That's the world that was, I think we're in a much worse place now with people's appreciation, or you could say better, because there's better, I think there's more understanding of what a grave situation the world is in. But I think it was beginning to percolate then that there were, significant problems. And this ring of 17 goals gave people hope and optimism. And we just pushed that like crazy. And I think that is our role, I think, in the ecosystem at Project Everyone, is that we keep pushing the optimism like crazy, whilst behind the scenes trying to make sure that the accountability is happening and the actions are being supported, and certainly the activists are also being uplifted. But without that hope and optimism, I think you can't shift anyone. And that's always my personal tension in this work, is that some days, we all have them, you wake up just wanting to scream at whoever your target is that day for like, what, we don't have time, how can you not see that? But we also have to say, and won't it be great when we can try this or try that? And back to the citizens' assemblies, I think that's where they can create such energy, because no activist, no leader, no climate change kind of pioneer has the energy to bring the whole world with them. But the whole world probably has the energy to bring the whole world with us. But we need to bring them on board, and I think fueled by energy and optimism and science.
Bhavini, I know that you wanted to jump in there, so.
Yeah, I wanted to really mention something about the disproportionality of responsibility here. So when we talk about inspiring people, you know what, the Global South doesn't need to be inspired about what they need to be doing, because they're doing the best that they possibly can, right? So let's talk about saying, yes, we need to inspire people that are comfortable, right? And so we've got to shift them in that consciousness of that comfortability, which you kind of drew on there, Gail, right? Because unless you can see the fragility of continuing business as usual, and that your children or your grandchildren or even yourself in the next 10 years is going to face the equivalent of wartime rations, the equivalent of having to look after each other in ways that money cannot solve, because by then money's not going to be relevant. The only people that can support you is community. So it's in unpacking that identity of what can fix it, because I personally feel that there's a lot of middle class people in the North that think that they can buy themselves out of any trouble. And this is what I mean about, yes, we need to inspire, but we need to be telling the truth, right? The truth is what's missing, because it's so easy to continue your everyday life. You get a bit of truth and go, oh, well, it's not going to be affecting me, and I can move it back in my consciousness and keep making my cup of tea and off I go, right? So this is the interchange, and I call it like a Venn diagram. You've got inspiration, you've got truth telling, you've got action, and all of those things have to come into an interplay within community, because once you get it that into community, you can mobilize through many, many, many people, because they feel they own the dialogue and they feel that they actually can make a difference. Because at the moment we have society set with the top down, where governments are making all these decisions and people feel so disempowered that they just think, a lot of my activism, people are like, well, there's nothing I can do because look what they're doing over there. And it's like, well, actually, while they're doing that, let's do a plan down here. Because if we can get 1 million and 1 billion of us doing what we think is right, see the people up there, there's only a few compared to us. And if we can get ourselves moving, they will have to listen. And I think this is one of the number one things that the challenge is here in the UK is to bring people to awareness that they actually do hold a lot of power and that they can be effective. But in order to come to that, they've got to communicate with each other and be given the tools.
Yeah, but what I think one of the other arguments that lots of people, and it's a very basic argument, is the fact that me buying an electric car or me buying swapping my gas boiler isn't really going to make that much difference when China is still heavily polluting the planet with coal. Russia is building its pipelines. How can little old me making little changes actually affect what's really going on out there?
I don't mind. Yeah, go for it. Go.
I just wanted to come in on what you're saying and to agree with you about this this universality point about money can't buy you out of it. And I'm really hopeful that the pandemic has taught the comfortable, as it were, that global shocks hit everyone. Do you remember there was a point, maybe this just amused me, but there was a point in the development of the virus and the spread of it where it went from being, at least this is a UK perspective, it went from being a kind of Chinese thing, bit of an Asian thing, and then Tom Hanks got it, right? One of the most privileged, white, famous, comfy people. And there was almost this, oh God, it's everywhere, and that sort of realized, and then it's rolled and rolled, It didn't matter where you were, didn't matter how wealthy you were, didn't matter what privilege you had. If your country was shut, it was shut. I mean, I'm sure there's a few exceptions on private jets, but by and large, it knew no kind of traditional boundaries. And I really hope that is, with that, we've carried something forward from that to know that, one system, and the feeling of that global shock was not good. So that's one thing I took from you there. And then, God, do you want to respond on that particular point?
Yes, because the particular point I have about, and this is what I meant about education and telling the truth about COVID, that this is a man-made impact for our climate, right? Our climate is responding to the way that we've been treating it, right? And so it's kicking back at us. So when everybody, and it hasn't been taught and people haven't connected those dots, that actually our human behavior has caused and led to this pandemic. And it's this critical piece of information that if we can get through to the psyche of the population globally, that people will go, I don't want any more things like that happening to me. How can we move? And I feel like we missed an opportunity globally to be getting that straight and front and center, that this actually is man-made. And so therefore we have some way of being part of the dialogue of prevention for that happening again. And also that if we don't start taking part in this dialogue, it is going to happen again, right? This is only the start. And so I think there's some delusion, and people need that sometimes in order to operate, but we've got to unpack that this is only the first round. We are going to see many more things like this happen to us if we don't start taking action.
And it's why theories like the lab leak are so dangerous, because it takes away from the reality of bad human behaviors that like deforestation, habitat encroachment, putting exotic animals in environments that would never naturally occur in nature. And the consequences of that are creating fertile breeding grounds for the next mutation that can run wild. Epidemiologists around the world have predicted that an infectious disease outbreak is imminent and have been anticipating that it would be a bird flu going viral. Rather, this coronavirus really caught this community off guard. And so even with knowledge and understanding behind the scenes, the fact that this virus broke out and grounded our lives to this screeching halt, and this was one that wasn't necessarily at the top priority radar for epidemiologists. Imagine what's going to happen when it's actually the virus that has been predicted now for decades, which is that mutant bird flu. So I appreciate what you said very much. It's bad human behaviors. It's our demand and supply of products as the population increases. And it is the warming trend. It's that dual trend of the planet warming and increased global population that's resulting in habitat encroachment, deforestation, and ultimately increased infectious disease outbreaks.
And what's frightening is what's the climate equivalent of the bird flu that everyone knew was coming, but we still acted shocked when COVID came. Like, is it a massive flood like in the book, Ministry for the Future? Or is it the heat kind of event? Is it a massive sea level rise? And are we really going to then stand around and go, oh, well, who knew that was going to come? So, well, we all knew that was going to come and we didn't do anything. So I'm really hoping that this narrative of like, well, that happened and we didn't like it, and actually we did know that was happening, and we know we're causing it. Let's like get ahead as much as we can and stop it. And the other thing I wanted to respond to what you said, Bhavini, about this idea of inclusivity, I think is misunderstood. As a Western-based climate campaigner, over the years, you'll get pushback saying, oh, but that's only relevant to the global north. And I think like that's okay, because this is by and large where the change needs to happen. I really just wanted to resonate with your point that people in the global south know and are doing their best to adapt and to survive and to kind of find new practices and to build community. If there's an argument for exclusive communication, if ever there's a time for that, it's now, because we need to drive we have no time. You need to drive the maximum impact from the people who are causing the maximum problem. So I would like to kind of bin the notion of like, we must always be inclusive. No, we need to be inclusive in terms of people's kind of who's benefiting from this. But in terms of targeting who's causing the problem, I think we're okay to be exclusive there because we know where that is.
Sweta,
Sorry, that answers your question.
Well, I guess, yeah, it's about going to your question about, it being China doing this and so doing that. We still know per population that it's still the global north 5 times to 8 times consuming more carbon than anywhere across the globe, right? So let's stop lying about this, and it's distraction to be focusing over there. It's so easy always to point a finger outwardly rather than inwardly.
but what about people who inwardly would like to do something, but it's personal finances that are the issue? Because we need to address, the issue that the fact that it's expensive. Going green is actually out with some people's reach. They would like to do the right thing, but they simply can't afford to.
And this is why system change is essential, right? We know, and I'm sure Sweta is going to be able to give us some insight into what's happening in the US, but here in the UK, we know that system change is vital for us to meet it at the scale and at the speed of what is necessary, right? And that can be tax transformation, right? I spoke earlier about it in the subsidies that we give to fossil fuels. It's incredible. We give more fossil fuels than they make profit. Let that sink in, right? So it's a dying economy and we are just fueling it. And yet we've got all these other new technologies that we could be putting the money in so that the consumers themselves don't have to do the changes. The changes are systematic, that everyone benefits, right? And then the other key thing is, especially in this country about heating, we are in a winter of discontent in terms of all the different social justice elements, whether it be finances, whether it be food, whether it be heating, is coming to tipping points, right? And everyone talking about not having enough money to keep themselves warm, right? This country is wealthy enough to subsidize dying fossil fuel companies that are not even making profits, and yet cannot afford to give their people heating, right? So there isn't this illusion of capitalism and corporate greed and friends of friends who all keep this chain going needs to be broken. And the people there is enough money, so never make a mistake about this just transition. There is enough money in the economies globally to have a just transition. It's just that the powerful want to keep lots of that money for themselves and give crumbs to the rest of us so that we feel we cannot enact or make those changes.
Someone once said, I said that once, like, surely there's enough money in the world. And someone said, there's enough money in Switzerland. Like, you know, you don't even have to go global. There's enough money in one country in the world to solve it. I agree with you. If we can't afford to go green as a country, like, let's talk about our country for a sec, then let's subsidize people to go green, you know, whether that is through, you know, basic universal incomes, system change, like you say. And I learned another one of these crazy anomaly positions just this morning. My husband had read something about how the EU, which is supposed to be doing really good work with its Green Deal and you know, leading in many ways, is subsidizing the airline, or not even subsidizing, forcing the airline companies to fly something like 100,000 ghost flights a year to keep the routes open and viable, so that all those states seem perfectly connected. And the airlines are asking not to do it because the airlines are saying it's incredibly unprofitable. We can't afford to do it, and the EU is mandating and subsidizing it for what? You know, it's properly insane. So it does all come back to your very first point, Bhavini, about transparency and telling the truth. Like, we need to unearth all of this stuff. All of the stuff about where the money's hidden, all of the stuff about who's getting subsidized, which industries are being propped up. I actually find if you really unearthed it all and leveled it out, there would not be a problem with the finance for the transition. It is all there. There would not be a problem with human will, because we'd all be in it together and we'd all be quite happy to be mucking in. But there's these fake sort of almost scar tissue issues holding the old system up. And I don't know whether it's a global shock that's going to cause it, or citizens' uprisings, or inspirational leaders. And I suspect it's all of the above. I think everything has to happen at speed and scale, starting with transparency for sure.
Sweta, you want to join in on that?
I really enjoyed listening to my fellow panelists actually talk about this. Thank you for your inputs on and helping me think about it as well, because I approach it very much from okay, there is something we can do as individuals, as much as we need to have top-down multilateral policies that make it easier for individuals to do those things, right? So we can create a better choice landscape so that the individual can by default make a better choice in where their energy is coming from to the house, rather than having to opt out of choosing out of natural gas on their stoves. If they really don't want electric, they have to go out of their way to opt into natural gas for their stove tops. Those are different landscapes that we can create as in collaboration between the private sector and policymakers, and we can do it at the community level all the way up to multilateral governance and across so many different choices that impact an individual's decision making around the environment and how an individual is going to interact with the environment. So we need to improve the choice landscape so that people can default to better decision making. That's one. That's that systemic change that I heard Bhavini say loud and clear that I really agree with. And then, as you're saying, Gail, from that individual point of view, there's an opportunity to amplify efforts through through campaigns that add one additional person, and now you've got a team. You add 2 additional people, now you've got a group. You add networks of people that have similar, maybe in different parts of the world, but have similar grievances or similar efforts that they're trying to pursue. And now you've got widespread behavioral change that can influence, again, these are mutually reinforcing. You can have those individuals influencing the governance structures, and then the governance structures can support the individuals to make better decisions. And so I really do think and this is the question I get asked the most, I do think when individuals say, what can I do? This is like a much bigger issue. I mean, China has to change before anything I do matters. Well, no, that we do not have to wait for any nation state to do anything. We have incredible amount of contributions that we can make as individuals. And then through the power of adding additional people, we can really amplify our efforts. And one example is the logo right up behind me here. It's free to use. It's a tool that individuals can use to support their efforts and to really feel power in numbers and to see campaigns really make it from virtual community awareness to real world impact. Why aren't we taking advantage of the incredible technology and advances that we have made as a population, as a global population, and use that to fight the nation states? Let's use that to fight fossil fuels. It took 26 years for COP to finally say we need to phase and not even phase out, but phase down fossil fuels, right? But it finally got in there. We can expedite that now. We have the technology. We are better connected than ever before, regardless of what your feelings about social networks are. Sure, they're dual use. They can be used for nefarious, addictive purposes and money making and whatnot. There's all of the downside to social networks, but then there's the upside. And we here at We Don't Have Time, we like to focus on the upside of the power of connecting people to really amplify, find good ideas, scale those solutions, and we will help amplify the hell out of it. And we'll take down fossil fuel subsidies. We'll take down the bad nation state actors that are not being responsible environmental stewards. Everyone has a role to play.
And
Gail,
I'd really like to back you up there, Sweta, because people power, right? Power has never conceded without a demand, and that demand has never been achieved without people power. And if we look to history, right, social movements and system change has happened through with people power, right? We've got these scales that if we want to tip them, no government can keep the people down if it is louder than the government or the people in power, or those that are holding, especially fossil fuels. I would like to draw on the fact that the win for Glasgow, the Cambo oil fields, right? The license that they tried to put there, the people power prevented that from happening. Now, there was corporations and governments all wanting this thing that would have made lots of money for some key individuals, but the people power stopped that from happening. So let's make sure that the communities, when they say they can't do anything on a daily basis, maybe they can't. But listen, connect up your communities, because when someone comes and tries to put an oil rig in your back garden, be ready, because you know how to speak to each other and how to galvanize and get those things, because we've declared a climate emergency in this country. I mean, it was one of the first governments in the world to declare a climate emergency, and yet they have done zero. So words are cheap, my friends, right? So we've got to keep them accountable. Nobody is going to keep any governments accountable except for its people. And I think, especially in the Western world, we've got very comfortable thinking, well, I've got enough, I've got a roof over my head, it's all fine, don't really need to take part in politics. Now's the time you need to take. This is the time, if we want to actually make changes, is to actually be involved in political decision making. And that's really uncomfortable, especially in this country where apathy about politics, but there's going to be no choice because we have no time to start getting people mobilized in this way.
Gail, you are the professional communicator here. So how do we get that message out there?
Well, I've just looked up a stat, and it came from a friend who's in the same Extinction Rebellion movement as my panelist has been. And it's really mind-blowing. So I'm going to raise it here. I'm sure you know it, Bhavini, the 3.5% rule, which is that there's never been a time in history when 3.5% of the population have taken to the streets and then that change hasn't happened. So there's never been, and that's not a lot. 3.5% of any, you add up all the activists, you add up all the young people, you add up all the kind of leaders. That's achievable. So I'd only found that out quite recently. I love that statistic, gave me real hope. And I think absolutely you saw it really live and potent in Glasgow. You know, that is why Glasgow was the success it was. That combined with the fact that, you know, Indigenous people came and spoke for the first time, young people were included in a way that's never been included before. So I think we have a model now for how to do it, and that was Glasgow. Credit to the people behind it, including you. How do we get that message across? Well, that we try and do that all the time, and I think one of my co-founder Richard Curtis's mantras is to make things happen, you have to make things. So I think putting out stuff, short form, engaging, surprising content, ideally optimistic, but giving people tools, you know, to start conversations, giving people tools, visuals to unite under, like literally helps, because then you feel, especially the younger you are, you feel like you're part of a tribe and you feel like you're part of a movement. So I think we need to carry on doing that, but also give people the tools to create their own tools. So I love the model that there's a wonderful company called Amplifier in the States who do this. You know, we've started to do it where you equip people with workshops to do their own artwork, to do their banners, to do their marching, because then they're like doubly engaged. So I think we've had a bit of a lazy model of like, just share this. How about now get together, talk about your issues at a community level, create your own iconography for the change you want to see. Then people are going to be much more interested in using. So I do slightly think we need to brand these revolutions, because as humans, for some reason, we seem to dig brands. But the era of a top-down brand, you know, something like Black Lives Matter is so interesting. Its logo, its iconography, its visuals emerged, right? Nobody sat in an agency box designing what that was going to do. It just kind of organically exploded in lots of different forms and continues to do that. And I think that's the future, is equip people and educate people and encourage them to create their own movement building tools, and then we'll see it flourishing.
Sweta, would you concur?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That was really well stated. And I think the tools that you're talking about, in addition to actually being, because not everybody's necessarily comfortable with being on the ground, and we can do both, and we can actually turn virtual movements into real world impact. And that's something that's also, it's a little bit of a kind of one of these things that have emerged out of COVID, but it's something We Don't Have Time has been doing well before COVID. So our group has a strict no-fly policy, for example. The founder of the company has not flown since starting this company. Until we can actually make aviation sustainable, he will not get on a plane. And so that's because of the technology. We have the ability to connect people from all over the world and to just enhance and amplify really good ideas and solutions. And let's take full advantage of these tools, and let's support people on the ground. We need that, absolutely. But now we can even scale it virtually, which is really what's exciting.
Can I bring you back to that subject? So in fact, Gail, on you go. You can follow on from that.
I also think, if anyone wanted to come in, but I think it is the combination. That's the thing. I'm just thinking, again, very kind of in our face at the moment. We have a prime minister who's on the spot because he seems to have been breaking every rule going when everyone else was really truly suffering under rules. But he's not going anywhere, because the only pressure that is currently being applied is virtual. I mean, it's as heavy as you can get. It's parody, it's satire, it's media attack, but he's not going anywhere. But I reckon if you had an XR type, you know, Occupy going on right now around Parliament also, then he probably would go, because there's something about that in the face. And I was minded of the lovely, you know, is it Gandhi, the quote about, say you're never too small to make a difference, but, you know, ask a man who spent the night with a mosquito. Sometimes you need the physical mosquito, but equally you can do a virtual swarm. That's amazing. So I feel like we are definitely in a both and world here, but like not one or t'other, like it's an and. But Bhavini, you wanted to say something on this too.
Yeah, so the tools, digital tools, are great, but it does not compensate for feet on the ground. For effective change, accountable, effective change. So 2 weeks ago here in the UK, we mobilized something like 10,000 people, right, on the streets for the Lords here against the police crime sentencing bill. And because of that, we managed to have 14 amendments that were toxic to the individual human thrown out of that bill. Now, had there not been that level of mobilization physically, we would not have seen that happen, because in this country, people are armchair warriors. They love to sign a petition. They love to send an email. And don't get me wrong, these are important tools, but they are not effective on their own. Right? Never has a petition been effective on its own when you need mass changes that power refuses to concede on. So, for example, Boris Johnson is, as you quite rightly said, is going nowhere until we have social justice movements all demanding for his resignation in their masses on the street. It's as simple as that. He will be able to reinvent himself time and time again. And the reason I say this is because when you have a disenfranchised population governing, you cannot govern a disenfranchised population that wants to take the streets. So it is as we should have been shown by the Indian farmers in India, they took it for a year. They were still, I mean, Modi, my gosh, I mean, there is no government that could have kept it going to that extent. Here in this country, you have an occupation for even one day of 100,000 people, governments and people are toppling, right? So please, yes, by all means, these tools to help us coordinate, communicate and galvanize and get effective, yes, but it does not compensate for the feet on the ground, because without the numbers on the ground, very little has ever been achieved. And we see that through all the movements. If you look at suffragettes, the changes that the suffragettes got, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, there has been never a civil resistance movement that has been effective without the feet on the ground.
It's an A and an A, isn't it? It's the awareness and the action. And I suspect the digital side of things is how you get enormous awareness quickly. Like, you know, with the goals, you know, these things can spread like wildfire, and they have to. And then the action is probably driven, as in the outcome, is driven by the feet on the ground and support, but not always possible, especially in COVID. It won't be possible perhaps at COP in Egypt, but so we'll have to go really lean heavily into digital and get the feet on the ground elsewhere. But I think they do complement really well, but it's awareness and it's action.
It's got to be, and this is what I meant about having that education, but coming to action. And action is, it's multi-layered to taking people. And when I talk about trust and I talk about moving through to action, it is meet people where they are, really establish where is someone, where is a community. Because if you're trying to start up here with a level of education and they're down here, right, you're going to just miss it. It's just going to go right over, right? So to actually meet people where they're at, in terms of their understanding, their knowledge, and even maybe what they're willing to do, right? The amount of people I've met and I've worked with in communities that weren't really willing to do much, but to turn up to a conversation in a people's assembly and listen. And they thought that's all they were going to do, is turn up and listen and then be gone, because it would bring them to feel like they've done something. But that is when that golden opportunity arrives. If I had sat there and gone from this level, I would have disenfranchised them, disengaged, and they'll have never come back. I make very clear and assess very quickly where my audience is at. Because when we understand that, we know how to take them on a pathway of a journey, because everyone's got to go on a journey, and different people will go on that journey at different speeds, and we'll need different tools. And as long as we respect people's journey, there's none of this blaming and shaming people. We've got to take people on a journey at the pace that they're ready to go and build that trust, because once the trust is built, it's got more roots, and you can mobilize in a faster, more rapid way when you do it that way. If you don't build through trust and you go and don't meet people at where they are, then you lose those roots very rapidly. So you have to keep doing the same thing again and again and again to engagement. But if you create those roots really deeply, then when you need it, it escalates really fast. So I really, especially with you, Sweta, because of the whole work that you're doing in behavioral science, I really welcome some of your knowledge on this subject, because I think there's a lot to be learnt there.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask you, is it basically the winning of hearts and minds? Is this the way that we can basically build this trust?
It's not just hearts. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Not just hearts and minds, it's shifting consciousness, okay? Because if your consciousness level is here and your heart and mind is here, we're not going anywhere. We're not going anywhere. We're going to be at stalemate. Because everyone says they don't want to be, everyone agrees that they don't want to see climate collapse, right? But that's not helping. There isn't a person that's going to say, yeah, I want to see climate collapse, is there?
Yeah, really love it. Super. Like I'm sitting down waiting for it.
Well, I think what you're doing in practice is actually very supported by the science community, and you're collecting data, whether you realize it or not, on the ground. That's actually proving the robust methodology of how important it is to develop those relationships with communities and identify who, if they don't exist in the community, who outside the community is the trusted potential conduit between the messaging that you would like to see happen, or the action you would like to see happen, or whatever, the campaign you would like to see supported, finding that conduit between that campaign and the community. And really, it comes first and foremost before anything else. And this is kind of behavioral science 101, specifically known as the mental models approach, is what are the existing mental models of the group of people that you are trying to reach? That is so key. And if we just invested a little more time and money into this formally, we would spare ourselves a lot of wasted resources and heartache in terms of having behavioral outcomes that we didn't anticipate or we weren't predicting. So it's so worth our time to what you're doing, Bhavini, kind of without even having it in any formal way, perhaps, but actually finding, identifying resources, and they're really cost effective. This is not an expensive thing to do, but taking the time to map out those existing mental models in these populations that we're trying to reach. What are their beliefs? What are their identities? What are their hopes and fears? What do they know or don't know? Are there beliefs that are actually wrong? Could we say that they're at odds with the science? Or maybe they're just priorities are different. It requires taking the time to understand the mental models, the innate perceptions, the schemas, whatever you want to call it, of those that you're trying to communicate to. So that's step one, and it's never done. That's unfortunately the truth of it. It's such a simple prerequisite to successful communication and behavioral change, but it's just one of those things that is first cut from a budget, if it's even in the budget, or it's just thought of as something we can gloss over. And then next thing you know, you're communicating to a group of people that could really benefit, again, from co-creating solutions, or get behind supporting some bigger issue, and you've lost them. Like you said, Bhavini, you've lost them because you started here and they were here, or vice versa, or there was just something that you didn't even consider that was preventing the support that you were looking for. Let me give you one example. I'm on the board of EcoHealth Alliance. It's the largest surveillance and mitigation not-for-profit looking to prevent infectious disease outbreaks in the world. And there were increasing outbreaks of Nipah virus in Malaysia, Indonesia, that region of the world. And nobody could figure it out. Everybody was scratching their heads as to understanding why these particular communities were being so were disproportionately suffering from Nipah, which is a highly lethal disease. And what was found out is that once they actually went to the communities, had field epidemiologists go to the communities and have conversations with those who were collecting sap from palm trees without lids on these collection bins, that simple intervention of putting the lid on the bin, which never would have been understood otherwise, because you have all of these, you have different groups that are trying to improve public health outcomes in this part of the world without ever going and having these conversations and seeing what's uniquely going on in the community. All it took was a simple intervention of putting the lid on the bin so the bats that carry Nipah virus in their saliva wouldn't come and lick up the sap and then transfer Nipah virus from their saliva into the actual collection bin. Simple intervention, and it just blew everyone's mind. It was the example that was used in EcoHealth Alliance and to all of the partner virology networks that were involved in trying to mitigate against infectious diseases. And it's just such a classic example of, wow, if we actually just took the time to put people on the ground, physically go there, and actually do the in-depth qualitative interviews. Okay, that's one way to word it. Or generous listening, active listening. Sit down, spend an open-ended session with sample people from the demographic that you're looking to influence, pull them out and just sit and listen, ask questions, open-ended questions, and really listen and map out what the existing perceptions are. And I guarantee that is step one in truly building that trust and also being able to create the messaging that is going to close those gaps from those perceptions that these groups have to whatever it is that you hope to achieve. And so that is something that I hope we see more of as we go forward. It's simple, it's cost effective, and it's incredible how much it influences behavioral outcomes in a positive way.
But you've actually just teed up one of the questions that's going to be coming up next, and it's basically from one of the TEDx Glasgow partners. Now, TEDx Glasgow works with a number of partners throughout the year, including Citizen M, where we're actually coming from tonight, with each partner fully engaged and invested in our action for climate change. Now, we have two joining us tonight, with Dr. Liz Wilkes from Asia Paper and Pulp, and Sarah Katz from Ramble, waiting in the wings. Now, are we going to be able to see them on screen now? There we have Liz. So Liz, what would you like to ask our panel?
Well, it's been a great panel session so far, and I found it really, truly inspiring, honestly. And it's really nice to hear you talk about the global north and south, because quite often that's not always discussed, I think, from my experience. I think one of the biggest learnings for us as a company is that truly sustainable landscape works at its best when we engage with, trust, and empower the community in moving to sustainable practices. And we've certainly seen this from some of our experience with our integrated forestry and farming programs. For the panel, I'd like to ask, what best practice have you seen when the private sector engages with communities at large, and some of the impact that this can have?
Who would like to go first with that one?
I've got one that just comes to mind. I don't know if it's the very best, but it's an example of a private sector company who, okay, to restart the answer, it really annoys me when you catch companies doing the minimum viable product, as it were, to like not get caught or not get called out, or to hit, you know, whatever ESG target they've signed up to. I get really excited when I see a company that's gone into like maximum viable impact. And so the one that it's in my mind, and it's probably because I spoke with them quite recently, but the company Mars, who's a big US, obviously food and pet care company, they are doing an extraordinary amount of restoration of reefs. And the way that they do it is to go into community, see the reef damage, hear from the people who depend on the reef, work on the reef, and restore it, not just to reef health, but also social impact, so that people can have jobs that are based on a healthy reef rather than jobs that might be based on overfishing it, killing it, or tourism or whatever. So I just think that it's got a good name. It's called Hope Reef, because they have begun after this. And the other thing I like about this project is it's sustained. You know, they did not just go into that when it was fashionable and then get out when the money ran out. You know, that I think it's been going for over 10 years, which is, if you're talking about long-term environmental restoration, you need that. But it feels to me like they've done it with the community. There one in Indonesia and now one in the Maldives. It feels like they've done it really successfully with the community. And I think that the other one I'd mention in that space is Iberostar, is a hotel chain who work in the Spanish-speaking world, equally working very much at the intersection of tourism and the local community. So making sure always that they're doing a combination of supporting the local fisheries, supporting the local kind of building service industry, and also educating their incoming tourists, which I think is where often businesses fall short and miss an opportunity. But they have a whole education program for people used to coming through the hotel. So they're just, as I say, I think there's a ton of great examples. They're just two I've seen in the ocean space that are doing great work, I think.
Can I be a bit controversial there? I'm sorry, but I'm going to call out Mars as a company that's greenwashing by doing some reef work over there when they're one of the biggest polluters of plastic and production of plastic. We cannot be giving them brownie points on a panel like this. It is inconceivable that it's like having a tap running and putting a bucket with holes and going, oh, well, I'm plugging the holes. How good am I? Instead of going to the source and stopping that tap running. And it's the same for me when we talk about the tourist industry. You know, are you still accepting tourists that catch a flight to your venue? Then stop that, because you're not protecting your local people. You're not protecting their environment at all. You've got to go to the source of this. So I really struggle with some of these projects that kind of come up, and I know what the corporates inevitably manage to do this, because they try to go, okay, we're going to put something nice greenwashing over here. How fluffy and lovely are we? Even though over here we're doing 10 times more, 100 times more impact, but look how good we are over just in this little bit of the work that we're doing. I don't need them to be doing that. I need them to be stopping what they're doing. So any tourism, hotel chains, or anybody that's listening here, if you truly are green, do not accept any traveler that's got on a plane to come to you. That's what's called effective green strategy. I don't want to hear about mangroves and protecting. It's not helping because they're still getting on speedboats and doing their ski jets. It's, yeah, I appreciate that the effort and stuff like this, but I've seen corporates reinvent themselves time and time again. Look at what we have in this country. The Science Museum, Shell, for Christ's sake, Shell, the oil company, is sponsoring the environmental science exhibition, right? Come on. And this is what I meant about shifting consciousness, right? We've got to call it out when we see it. Let's not let the corporates get their foothold back into the system to extract more from us in our carbon footprint as well as capital, right? And then the other key thing here is, if, from my perspective, if you want to see a good and it's not perfect, so you can also be devil's advocate back to me, guys, is Ecotricity, which is it's a company here in the UK that saw the need for generating electricity through eco technologies that are available. And what they've done effectively is start off small and reinvested all their profits to increase their network and keep increasing their network, So they're getting to a point where they're at a tipping point where they can actually reduce their cost of their fuels to people. So initially it was meant that it was a little bit more expensive to have them as your supplier, but there is people in this country that can afford to be taking the burden of cost of the transition in order to support this transition to get to a tipping point where the economies of scale then benefits everyone. So when we see something more broad ranging and then becomes more inclusive, then yes. But this piecemeal thing that, look over here, I'm doing something really nice, but over here I'm doing something really dramatically bad, but I'm not going to show you that. Keep focusing on over here. So thank you for sharing and listening, and I do find it difficult to challenge and call out stuff. So
you challenged and called it out very well. I think we had a very interesting panel and debate about the pace, you know, the role of corporates in driving change and, you know, honoring some progress rather than perfection. And we can definitely agree on Ecotricity. I agree, it's a fantastic example.
I would add to this, greenwashing is of course egregious and rampant. Equally bad that we as a company say is green hushing. So if there is progress being made in companies that are trying to pivot from past polluting operations to what is now going to be supported by those that identify truly as environmental stewards, we need them to be able to showcase that, and we need them to be able to share that, and we need to, as a community, give support for that. So this little green heart behind me is what we refer to as climate love, and companies that are not greenwashing but are truly putting solutions forward, and it's baby steps in a lot of instances, absolutely, but our community shows climate love too, and the majority of ideas and efforts and campaigns on the We Don't Have Time platform is positive. It's climate love. And this is important, not just because we can't green hush. We really need to showcase the amount of effort that's going in by the private sector as well into changing towards the green transition. I mean, this is the writing's on the wall. This is what's happening. It's better economically for companies as well, and they get it. There's going to be some that don't make it through, and that's perfectly fine. We'll figure it out together. But ultimately, this is the best end outcome for corporates, is to get on board with this. And we need to show support for that as a community, and through this climate love. And the reason that this works is because as this is how our brains are wired. We need the fear to actually get us to propel us into paying attention, because there's so much that's being saturated in terms of our information landscape is just absolutely saturated. And to pay attention to this crisis, we need to call it what it is. It's a crisis. It's an emergency. So we need to get people's attention through fear, but ultimately what mobilizes action, what gets people to come together and to pursue solutions and to volunteer if it's not their day job, is positive, tangible, actionable next steps and positivity. It's hope that solutions are on the horizon and that we can find them together as communities. And that's why we share climate love. It's that positivity that really moves us forward in terms of progressing towards that end goal. So that's really important in terms of wanting to support the efforts that are being made from the private sector. It's not perfect. There's plenty of greenwashing in there, but we really are all in this together, and we have to move money. That's where the muscle is, ultimately, to see some of these solutions true to reality. And we do like to give support where it's due.
Liz, thank you so much for that question. Sarah, are you there, and are you ready with your question now?
Yes, good evening from Copenhagen, and I agree with Liz. Thank you for a great, very thought-provoking panel and a very inspiring event. So I'm Sarah Katz, I come from Rumble, and as a company, we're conscious of the challenges that lie in having societal engagement and commitment behind our work to decarbonize. We're very focused on supporting the acceleration towards net zero, but we can also see that some projects in the green transition might not always incorporate a holistic approach or focus enough on the just transition that you were also talking about earlier. So with your broad experiences in the panel, do you have some suggestions for us on how to bridge this challenge between the green transition and the just transition?
Who would like to take that one first?
I nominate Bhavini.
I just know that I've been talking quite a lot, so I thought I'd let you guys, but I'm happy to take the and this is a complex question, and it's going to be something that's going to be learned as you make mistakes, or learn as you come to awareness, or through education. So there are times that I see the lack of education, good meaning, thoughtful people wanting to take action, and so we get green transition projects, and it's only through taking those steps that they suddenly meet people going, oh, but that's not very nice. Look, you haven't seen the impact over there. Yes, you've created great impact over here, but you've also disempowered or created a negative impact over here. And this is what we mean about just transition, right? It's such a complex thing. So even in the activism world, and I sit in a lot of white spaces, as you know, I'm from Extinction Rebellion. And so even within our movement, there's often times when we find ourselves, we find ourselves going, have we asked or checked in with people that have wisdom from other countries on this particular subject that we think we know the most about? You know, and so it's just doing that double checking within yourself. And if you don't have the answer, there is plenty of people to connect with. And I think the biggest thing that I say, especially with the Global South that has lots of wisdom about a lot of the things that have been impacted them. So as Sweta said, they know how things are happening and falling out over there. Don't be shy to be making those connections, right? Because it's the connections of lived experiences and lived wisdom that are already facing the climate collapse, that have actually in small scales found ways of protecting themselves from things that are unfolding that haven't been talked about or even pursued in any way in the global north, because we haven't faced that particular threat at this time. So when we look about the curve of this solution, it can be just if you are inclusive and you bring about the wisdom. So yes, when we talked about earlier about saying that it's okay that some of it doesn't have to be inclusive in terms of people that need to do the actioning and the reducing, but when we talk about the solution, it has to be inclusive. Because if it's not inclusive, you don't get those wisdoms, you don't get those learnings and the insights that can better enable you, especially in the global north, because we're so used to consuming more of everything. Even when we get a new nice just transition, we'll be tempted to offset it so that people in the global north get more of it than the south. And the autocorrect, because it's not that people are doing it intentionally, because it's about deprogramming. It's how we've been programmed through capitalism and how we've been programmed through the structures that, so it's not the intent, I get it, but the unpacking of that intent. If you have inclusivity, you will meet some of those head on before you hit some barriers. And a just transition does include, and this is my work when I talk about racial justice, why it's front and center of my work, is that concede power, share resources, and skills, right? Because there's lots of people that have all these three things in abundance that some other community members don't. But the other community members have ideas and know what some of those solutions are, but they don't have any of those three things to support them to bring those solutions to the table. So that's what a just transition needs to embed too. And that's why technology, so the stuff that Sweta's doing is really important, because it can accelerate some of that and support some of those ideas that are around in the Global South, that just, because they're already facing, what I find so hard is that the Global South is already facing these challenges. You don't need to go and sit in your ivory tower over in the Global North and figure out how you can do something. Go and speak to the people over there. They're already at the front line, and they've already found small solutions that work for their community that you could probably scale very rapidly. And don't be shy, right? Because I know that there's this awkwardness between different cultures and different communities, and especially around the racial justice stuff with Black and brown people. Knock on doors, people. Let's get messy together, right? Let's overcome those boundaries of communicating with each other. And guess what? It's going to be hard. Listen, racial justice and doing this work, you're going to be crying, but you're also going to be laughing and having joy, because you're going to be stepping on minefields, and someone's going to be educating you, and you'll be like, oh my God, I really messed up there. And you'll be like, yeah, you did. And I'm going to call you out for it, but it's okay. Let's keep moving. So be ready to be emotionally taken on a journey if you truly want to do just transition, because it's an emotional journey, because you will have to connect with different types of people that you're not used to, and have to learn in different ways to get to that just transition. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Now, we are actually now quite out of time. So I just want to say a huge thank you to all of our panel. You've made my job incredibly easy tonight, because you have just sparked off each other so incredibly well. But thank you so much. But I do want to ask one final question of each of you, because, well, this is Society Acts. And the question I'd like to ask is, if you could implore our audience and society as a whole to do just one thing after tonight's discussion, what would that one thing be? I'm going to go to you first, Gail.
Oh, again, it's you're ending with as big a question as you started with. Well, it's top of my mind at the moment is nature. Is getting nature positive. And so I just ask, if I could only say one thing, just people to reflect on their position and relationship to nature, which hopefully will lead them to realize we are nature, like we're in nature. And so is every single choice you're making in your life in cohort with and in supportive of a natural, thriving world around us. So just try and live a nature positive life. That's different for everybody, but that's my one thought about is stay nature positive.
Bhavini?
Go find out what you're inspired about. Lead through what is your passion. And whatever that passion and inspiration is, then go and see how you can make a difference to the climate crisis. Because when you lead through passion, it will serve you not just in bringing you joy, but also you will be very effective when you walk that journey.
And finally, Sweta.
Okay, I'm gonna cheat and do two, but the first one's really quick. So very easy, tangible action step to take. Download the We Don't Have Time app, it's free, and just open up your universe if you haven't already. See how many cool campaigns are on there that you can get immediately involved in, and you can support really good climate actions and support scaling them into real world solutions. So that's one. And two, with my behavioral science hat on, I challenge you, and this is something every individual can do. The same way you would be aware of your breath when you are practicing yoga or you're meditating, take a moment and raise your awareness to any snap judgments that arise during the day. And this can be about anything. It can be and immediately seeing a label on a food that says GMO free and wondering why that makes you feel that it's safer. Or if you're walking down the street in the US, this is especially poignant. If you see somebody wearing a red hat, do you immediately feel repulsion because the red hat became part of this Make America Great Again campaign that Trump ran on? But there's different things that result in an immediate response for us. We innately do this as human beings. Become aware of it, the same way you become aware of your breath, and then challenge it. Take the time, spend 5 minutes every day, and actually look at credible sources and see if that judgment was accurate. Do it with the person you walk past and why you felt positive or negative about, and then actually look up what the statistics are. Does red hat mean Make America Great Again? Or maybe there's a football team nearby that has a similar signage. That will allow you to begin to better calibrate perceptions to the reality. And we need to better align with data. It's the one thing we have in common as humans that we can thrive on, is if we follow the science, we're setting ourselves up for a better future.
Panel, thank you so much. It's been quite a conversation tonight, and that's our first conversation worth having over for 2022. The next TEDx Glasgow conversation worth having will take place on Business Innovates and will take place in May. Now, we do hope you'll join us, but until then, we're going to leave you with some wise words in the hope that you'll be inspired to keep this conversation going and, most importantly, act. Good night.
Nature once determined how we survive. Now we determine how nature survives.
You have stolen my dreams, my childhood, with your empty words.
Difficulty is no excuse for complacency. Unease is no excuse for inaction. We don't have much time left to make that dream.
Right now, we are in the midst of the Earth's 6th mass extinction.